You think you can get away with this? The voice was sharp, like the crack of a whip, filled with an arrogant confidence that only comes from youth. The thief, eyes darting nervously around the house, was oblivious to the old man sitting quietly in the corner. Ben Turner, a man whose face had seen decades of life, sat still in his worn leather chair, his gaze never wavering from the intruder. He could hear the thief's footsteps, the soft scrape of the floorboards, but to the young man, Ben was just an old relic, nothing more than a frail body with no purpose. The thief laughed to himself as he moved around, rifling through drawers, unaware that the old man was far from helpless. Ben's fingers curled around the armrests, and a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. He had waited for moments like this. A lifetime of experience had taught him how to remain invisible, how to watch and listen. To most, Ben was a ghost. But not today. The thief moved closer, completely unaware that he was being watched. He continued his search, thinking he had all the time in the world. What he didn't know was that the man he had dismissed as an old fool had been in far more dangerous situations than he could ever imagine. Ben's eyes, pale blue and sharp, locked onto the thief, tracking his every move. The old man didn't flinch, didn't twitch. He remained calm, every muscle in his body coiled tight, ready to spring into action when the time was right. The thief paused for a moment, sensing something was off, but he shrugged it off. No one would stop him. Not in this sleepy town. He was a predator, and Ben Turner was nothing more than a prey. Or so he thought. Ben's mind flashed back to days long past, days filled with the sounds of war, the tension of life or death decisions, the weight of survival on his shoulders. He had been in places far more hostile than this quiet suburban neighborhood. His hands, weathered and strong, had held weapons in combat, and his heart had endured the pain of loss. But today, his weapon was silence. His weapon was patience. And soon it would be his turn to reveal who he truly was. As the thief reached for a small safe in the corner of the room, Ben shifted slightly in his chair. The sound was so subtle, so imperceptible, but it was enough. The thief froze, a chill running down his spine. He turned, eye scanning the room for any sign of movement. He saw nothing, only the old man, still sitting motionless, but now his presence seemed different. It was as though the air had thickened, the atmosphere charged with a power the thief couldn't comprehend. Ben finally spoke, his voice low, each word measured with precision. "You don't want to do this." The thief sneered, dismissing the old man's words as nonsense. But there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now, a hesitation that had not been there moments before. Ben stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The thief's eyes widened in disbelief as the old man, whose age he had so easily underestimated, took a step toward him. There was a quiet authority in his every action. The thief could feel it now, the undeniable weight of Ben's presence. "I don't need to do anything," Ben said, his voice steady. "But you, my friend, have made a big mistake." The thief's hand froze, hovering over the safe's lock, and for the first time, he looked into Ben's eyes, eyes that held the stories of wars fought, battles won, and enemies outsmarted. The thief took a step back, his confidence evaporating as the truth hit him. This wasn't just an old man. This was a veteran, a warrior, and in that moment, the roles had reversed. The thief was the prey, and Ben was the hunter. The thief took a step back, his eyes wide with disbelief as Ben's presence seemed to swell in the room, far larger than the frail body that housed it. Ben's gaze was steady, unwavering, locked onto the thief with the kind of calm that only a lifetime of combat could teach. The air between them thickened, filled with an invisible tension. The thief had expected a helpless old man, but he was facing something much more dangerous than he could have imagined. Ben's steps were slow but deliberate, each one echoing in the silence of the room. The thief's breath quickened, his instincts screaming at him that he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had been caught. Not by force, not by weapons, but by something far more powerful, respect. Ben stopped just a few feet away, the space between them now charged with an undeniable weight. "I've seen men like you before," Ben said, his voice a gravelly whisper, yet sharp as a knife. The thief's eyes flickered, confusion clouding his features. You think you can just walk in, take what you want, and leave without consequence. But let me tell you something, there's always a consequence. Always. The words hung in the air, heavier than any object the thief could steal. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching toward the small knife at his belt, but even as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer in control. Ben's eyes never left him. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the worst the world could offer, who had faced death in its many forms and walked away from it each time. The thief's hand hovered over the knife, but it felt like a foreign object to him now. His breath came in shallow gasps, the knife suddenly seeming less like a weapon and more like an anchor, tying him to a reality that no longer made sense. He didn't know it yet, but his fate had already been sealed. Ben's next words were like a spark in dry tinder. "You're not the first thief I've crossed paths with," Ben continued, his tone not one of anger, but of something deeper, something resigned, as if he had long accepted the role of those who have seen too much. "I've met men who thought they could get away with anything. But they always forget one thing, you can't steal respect. And that's what you're after, isn't it? Respect." The thief shifted uncomfortably, his hand now frozen in place. I don't know what you're talking about, old man," he stammered, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Ben's lips curled into a faint smile, the kind of smile that didn't promise kindness, but understanding. "You want to take what's not yours. You think you can walk into a place, take it, and just leave. But it's not that simple. Nothing is that simple. Not when you're up against someone who's been through real battles, real wars." Ben's words cut through the thief like a cold wind. The old man wasn't bragging, he was stating a fact that the thief couldn't argue with. Ben had fought wars, not just on the battlefield but in life itself. And he had won every single one of them, not by force, but by understanding the true value of power, of respect, and of patience. The thief's resolve began to crumble. He had underestimated the old man, had seen only a frail body and an unassuming appearance. But now, standing before him, Ben was more intimidating than any enemy he had ever faced. The thief tried to take a step back, but Ben was faster, his movement swift and sure, like a predator cornering its prey. "It's not too late to walk away," Ben said softly. "But I'm not going to beg you. I'm just going to give you one chance. Leave now, and you'll walk away with your life." The thief hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time since he had entered the house, he felt a deep, unsettling fear. He wasn't afraid of the old man's frailty, he was afraid of the strength in his eyes, in the unspoken authority that Ben commanded without lifting a finger. Ben took one final step forward, closing the distance between them. The thief looked down at the old man's steady hands, hands that had once held rifles and grenades, had saved lives in the midst of chaos, had endured pain and loss. He realized then that it wasn't just respect Ben had earned, it was fear. And in that moment, the thief knew that he was no longer in control. He was the one being hunted. The thief stood frozen, his body rigid, his mind racing. He had no idea how he had ended up here, caught in the gaze of an old man who seemed to tower over him despite his frailty. For the first time in his life, he felt small. He had been the one who controlled every situation, who manipulated and outsmarted everyone around him. But Ben was different. Ben was calm. Ben was steady. And in the presence of that calm, everything else felt chaotic. "I told you," Ben said, his voice low but steady, "I'm not going to beg you. I'm not even going to force you to leave. But I will make sure you understand one thing. You don't take anything from me without consequences." The words hit the thief like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, he wanted to run. He had no idea what kind of consequence Ben was talking about, but something in his gut told him that running would be the worst mistake he could make. Ben didn't move. He didn't need to. The power in his presence was enough. "I don't need to be a threat to you," Ben continued. "I don't need to raise my voice, or even lift a finger. You're already scared, aren't you? You're already wondering how this old man is so calm, how I'm standing here like I've been through worse." The thief swallowed hard. He hadn't realized it until now, but he had been afraid of this old man since the moment their eyes locked. There was a history behind those eyes, a story Ben had carried with him through years of battles, struggles, and survival. It wasn't just the old man's age that made him terrifying, it was the fact that he had lived through so much and had seen the world for what it truly was. And now, the thief was staring at the consequences of his own arrogance. Ben took a step forward, closing the distance between them. The thief instinctively took a step back, but his feet felt heavy, as if they were trapped in place. There was something in the way Ben moved, the quiet confidence in each of his steps, that made the thief feel like the ground beneath him had shifted. "I've seen too many men like you," Ben said, his voice unwavering. "Men who think they're clever, who think they can outsmart the world. But let me tell you something, you're not as clever as you think." The thief's heart raced faster now, the weight of Ben's words sinking in. "You can run, you can fight, you can try to take what's not yours, but in the end, the truth will always catch up with you. It always does." Ben's words were a reminder of something the thief had long forgotten. It wasn't just about taking things from people, it was about the respect, the trust, the lives that were intertwined in the moments when you least expected them. The thief's mind flashed to the men and women he had deceived over the years, the ones who had trusted him only to have that trust shattered when he walked away with their belongings. But Ben wasn't like those people. Ben wasn't someone who could be easily tricked or taken advantage of. Ben had seen it all. The thief suddenly realized that he wasn't just facing an old man. He was facing someone who had survived the kind of battles he could only read about in books. He was facing someone who had earned their place in the world, not through theft or deceit, but through honor. And in that moment, the thief knew he was out of his depth. The old man wasn't just a threat in the way he had expected. Ben was a force of nature, an embodiment of everything the thief had ever feared but never fully understood. And the worst part? The thief realized he had underestimated him. He had thought Ben was nothing more than an old man who had forgotten the world around him, but now he saw the truth. Ben hadn't forgotten anything. He had lived through it all, and he was still standing. The thief's shoulders slumped. He wasn't the one in control anymore. The old man had him right where he wanted him, and for the first time in his life, the thief felt powerless. The thief's hands trembled, and his breath came in ragged gasps. He had faced many tough situations in his life, but none had ever made him feel so small, so exposed. Ben's calmness was suffocating, the weight of his presence pressing down on him, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. The old man had taken everything from him without moving an inch, without lifting a finger. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, trying to regain control of the situation that had slipped through his fingers like sand. But every time he glanced at Ben, he felt the grip of reality tighten around him. There was no escape from this moment. "What's the matter, kid?" Ben's voice cut through the silence, steady and unbothered. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The thief's heart skipped a beat. His mouth went dry. The words didn't come out right. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but even to his own ears, the lie sounded weak, pathetic. Ben didn't react to the thief's denial. He didn't need to. He just stood there, his posture unyielding, his eyes focused and calm. The thief's skin prickled with discomfort. He had never felt so exposed, so naked, before anyone, let alone an old man who had no business being in his path. The world around him felt like it was closing in. He had tried to be slick, to take what he wanted and disappear without a trace, but now he was caught. Not just by the situation, but by the quiet force of Ben's presence, a force that seemed to fill the entire room. Ben let the silence stretch, like a heavy blanket. "You've been living your life like this, haven't you?" Ben's voice was softer now, but the question hit like a ton of bricks. The thief didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was written all over him, the arrogance, the greed, the hunger for things that didn't belong to him. He had spent his whole life taking, but never giving, never earning the respect he craved. But Ben wasn't a man who lived for respect. He had earned it, and he had learned long ago that there was more to life than what could be stolen. "I've seen it before," Ben continued, guys like you, think they can just walk in, take what they want, and leave without any consequences. But you don't understand the game, do you? It's not about what you take. It's about what you leave behind. The thief opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He was paralyzed by the weight of Ben's gaze, by the truth in his voice, by the sudden realization that the old man was right. He had been playing the wrong game his whole life. The thief had thought that getting what he wanted was the ultimate victory. But now, he wasn't so sure. Ben took a step closer, and the thief instinctively took a step back, his body finally reacting to the fear that had been building inside him. "You don't have to do this," the thief finally said, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a plea. It was a question. "You don't have to let me go," Ben replied, his voice still calm, still steady. "But you do have a choice. Leave now, and you'll get to walk away with something. Not much, but something. You'll leave with your pride. But if you stay and try to take what's not yours again, you'll leave with nothing. You'll leave with the knowledge that you could have walked away, but you didn't." The thief swallowed hard. His mind reeled with the implications of Ben's words. He could feel the weight of the choice, the gravity of the moment. He could leave now, but could he walk away from it all, from everything he had done, from the life he had built on lies and theft? Or would he stay? Would he risk it all for the sake of pride, for the sake of one more chance to take something that didn't belong to him? His eyes darted to the door, then back to Ben. But in that instant, he realized that leaving wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't fix the emptiness inside him, the hunger that had driven him all these years. It wouldn't erase the truth that Ben had shown him, that he had never truly lived, never truly earned anything in his life. The thief's shoulders slumped. He had no words left. His defiance had melted away, leaving only the painful truth. Ben had already won. Without a word, the thief turned and walked toward the door, his steps heavy, his body defeated. Ben stood in the same spot, unmoving, watching him go. There were no cheers, no grand gestures, no dramatic showdown. Just a quiet understanding between two men, one who had lived through the worst of it, and one who had only just begun to understand what it meant to live with honor. Ben watched the thief leave, the quiet sound of the door closing behind him the only noise breaking the silence. He stood there for a moment, his body unmoving, his mind replaying the moment over and over. The thief had walked away, not just from the house, but from a life that had led him to this point. Ben couldn't help but wonder if he had made the right choice, if the thief had truly learned anything. The old man didn't need to chase him down, didn't need to shout any threats or make a show of the victory. His win had been quiet, and that's what made it different. That's what made it real. Ben let out a slow breath, letting the weight of the past few minutes settle into his bones. He had seen so many people come and go, so many lives wasted because of choices just like the one the thief had made tonight. But there was something about this one, something about the way the young man had hesitated, something that told Ben that the lesson might have taken root, even if it didn't show right away. Ben sat back down in his chair, the familiar creak of the old wood grounding him in the present. The cool evening air brushed against his skin, and he closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the world outside. The rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant hum of the neighborhood settling into quiet, all of it was part of the rhythm of life, part of the way things were meant to be. He had done his part. He had offered the thief a choice, and the rest was up to him. Ben couldn't change the past, couldn't fix what had already been done. But he had been given this moment, this opportunity, to make a difference. And in a way, that was enough. He looked out the window again, watching the lights in the houses across the street flicker on as the night grew deeper. It was a peaceful kind of night, the kind Ben had learned to appreciate over the years. Life wasn't about grand gestures or battles won in the heat of the moment. It was about small victories, about living with honor, and about making the right choices when the time came. The thief's footsteps faded into the distance, and for the first time that night, Ben allowed himself a small smile. He didn't know what the future held for the young man, but he had given him a chance. And that was more than most people ever got. Ben turned his attention back to the evening, to the quiet that surrounded him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The night passed quietly, the world outside moving on as it always did. Ben sat in his chair, the light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls of the room. It was a peaceful night, one that seemed to stretch on forever, and yet, as he sat there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The thief had gone, but the encounter lingered in the air, like a memory that refused to fade. Ben wasn't sure if he had done enough. The old man had given the thief a chance, but it was up to the young man to take it, to learn from the lesson that had been handed to him. The uncertainty of it all gnawed at him. Had the thief truly understood the gravity of his actions, or had he simply been scared into submission, only to return to his old ways? Ben shook his head. He couldn't answer that. He couldn't predict the future, couldn't change what had already happened. What he could do, however, was hold on to the moment, the quiet victory of showing the thief another way. There was no need for fanfare, no need for recognition. Sometimes, the quietest victories were the most powerful. Ben looked at the small clock on the wall, the ticking sound steady and constant, a reminder that time kept moving forward, whether one was ready or not. The thief had walked out of that house, but life didn't stop for anyone. Ben didn't know where the young man would go from here, but he hoped, in some small way, that their brief encounter had made a difference. Ben had been in enough battles, fought enough wars, both literal and figurative, to understand one thing: change never came easy. It came in small, subtle ways, moments of clarity that built up over time. Maybe the thief wouldn't change today. Maybe not tomorrow either. But Ben had given him a glimpse of what could be, a glimpse of honor, a glimpse of a life lived without taking from others. And that was something. Ben stood up slowly, his joints creaking as he moved. He stretched his arms above his head, feeling the tension from sitting still for too long. It was time to move. Time to get on with life. The thief was gone, but the lesson remained. He couldn't save everyone. He couldn't fix all the wrongs in the world. But he could do his part. Ben stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air brushing against his face. He looked up at the stars, their light distant but constant, much like the quiet moments of impact that no one ever saw. And for the first time that evening, a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He had done what he could. Now it was time to let go. The morning arrived slowly, the first rays of light creeping across the sky, casting long shadows on the ground as the world woke up. Ben sat in his usual spot by the window, looking out at the familiar scene before him. The quiet neighborhood, the houses with their neatly manicured lawns, the distant hum of cars driving by, it was all just another day. Yet, somehow, it didn't feel like the same routine anymore. The thief's face kept drifting into his mind. Not because of the crime, not because of the confrontation, but because of what had happened afterward. Ben had seen people walk away from situations before, but this one felt different. It felt like there had been a shift, a moment of clarity, something that would linger with both of them. But would it make a difference? Ben wasn't so sure. He had seen so many men and women, just like the thief, who were stuck in their ways, trapped in their own mistakes. Some could change, some couldn't. He had learned that over the years. The hard truth was that not everyone could be saved. Not everyone wanted to change. But what Ben had done, what he had said to the young man, it had to mean something. Even if it didn't change everything, it had to be a step in the right direction. Ben had done his part. He had offered the thief a glimpse of another life, a life where respect and honor mattered more than taking what didn't belong to you. That was all he could do. The rest was up to the young man. It had always been that way. Ben stood up, stretching his stiff limbs, feeling the weight of the years in his bones. He was tired, but not in the way most people thought. It wasn't the physical exhaustion that weighed on him, it was the mental toll, the knowledge that so many people walked through life without ever truly understanding what it meant to live with integrity. It was a heavy thing to carry, but it was the reality he had learned to accept. He stepped outside onto the porch, the cool morning air brushing against his face. The sun was still low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful sight, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply breathe it in. The world had a way of moving on, whether he was ready or not. And that was the thing about life, it never waited. The thief had gone, but life didn't stop for him. It didn't stop for Ben either. There would be other encounters, other moments where people were faced with choices, but the one thing that was certain was that Ben had done what he could. It was never about winning or losing, it was about making sure that, when the time came, you could look yourself in the mirror and know you had done the right thing. Ben turned his gaze to the horizon, the quiet morning wrapping itself around him like a familiar blanket. Life went on. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Days passed, each one much like the last. The neighborhood remained unchanged, the hum of daily life flowing steadily around Ben, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The young thief, now a distant memory, kept resurfacing in his mind. Not because of the confrontation, but because of the way it had ended. Ben had done what he could, offered a choice, a lesson, and yet the world didn't seem any different. He knew change didn't happen overnight, but there was still a gnawing feeling of uncertainty. Was it enough? Did the thief truly walk away with something more than fear, or would he return to his old ways? Ben couldn't know. And that uncertainty lingered in the back of his mind, a quiet companion. But as the days stretched on, something within Ben shifted, ever so slightly. It was a quiet realization, something he had always known but never fully embraced. It wasn't about whether the thief had learned or not. It wasn't about whether anyone ever truly changed. It was about what Ben had done in that moment. He had given the thief a choice. He had chosen to be a presence of calm, of clarity, in a world that often felt anything but. That was enough. He didn't need to see the results. He didn't need to know the impact right away. He had done what he believed was right, and that was something no one could take away. Life wasn't about grand gestures, not really. It was about the small moments, the quiet acts of understanding, the times when you simply made the choice to do what was right, even when no one was watching. Ben stood at the window, looking out at the world beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of red and orange. It was beautiful, the way the light shifted, casting long shadows across the streets. It reminded him that life moved forward, whether you were ready or not. The thief was a part of the past now, just another face in the crowd. But for a brief moment, he had been a part of Ben's story, and that was something Ben would hold on to. It wasn't the thief that mattered in the end, it was the choice, the opportunity to make a difference in someone's life, even if they didn't realize it at the time. Ben let out a slow breath, feeling a quiet peace settle over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from certainty or answers. It was the kind that came from knowing that, no matter what, he had done his part. The world was full of uncertainty, full of people making choices that would echo through the years, for better or for worse. But in this moment, in the stillness of the evening, Ben knew that he had made the right choice. And that was enough. The weeks drifted by like the seasons changing, each day folding into the next, bringing a quiet rhythm to Ben's life. He still sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. The thief's presence in his life had faded, replaced by the steady hum of everyday moments. But every so often, Ben would think back to that night, to the choice he had given the young man. He had tried not to dwell on it, knowing that his actions, his words, had been all he could control. What the thief did with them was no longer in his hands. But a part of Ben couldn't help but wonder, had it mattered? Had the moment made a difference? It was in the quietest of times that Ben's thoughts would wander back to the encounter. He never expected a dramatic turnaround, never hoped for some grand gesture in return. He had simply done what he believed was right, offering the thief the opportunity to change, to take a different path. That, in itself, was enough. The days grew shorter as fall approached, the air cooler and crisp with the promise of winter. Ben didn't need to be reminded of the passage of time, it was something he had come to know intimately over the years. His body, now more worn than it had ever been, ached with the weight of a long life lived, but his mind remained sharp, clear in ways that sometimes surprised him. One evening, as he sat on the porch, a familiar face appeared at the end of the street. Ben didn't recognize the figure at first, but as they grew closer, something about the walk, the posture, felt familiar. The young man who had once been a thief, now a stranger in a different way, approached cautiously. Ben's heart gave a small jolt, and for a moment, he was unsure of what to do. But he didn't need to act. He didn't need to say anything. The young man paused at the foot of the steps, his eyes meeting Ben's with a mixture of hesitation and something else, respect. Ben had seen this look before. It wasn't the kind of respect given out of fear. No, this was different. This was the kind of respect that came from understanding, from having learned something the hard way. For a long moment, the two men stood there, neither speaking. Then, finally, the young man spoke. I wanted to thank you, he said, his voice steady but quieter than Ben had ever imagined it could be. I didn't realize what I was doing at the time. But I know now. I've tried to change. Ben didn't smile. He didn't need to. The words, simple and honest, were enough. It's up to you now, Ben replied, his voice calm, as it always was in these moments. But you're already on the right path. The young man nodded, then turned and walked away, his pace slower than before, more deliberate. Ben watched him go, his thoughts settling into a quiet peace. The world moved on, as it always did, and people came and went. But for one fleeting moment, a young man had chosen a different path, a better one. And for that Ben felt something he hadn't expected, hope. The evening deepened, the cool air swirling around him, and Ben settled back into his chair. The lesson had been given. The thief had walked away, but now, he wasn't the same person he had been when he came. And that, in the end, was all Ben could ever hope. 4.